What's up, guys? I'm coming at you from Shenzhen, and in today's chat I wanted to quickly talk about the national security laws for Hong Kong and why they're important. So first off, I wanted to briefly mention that Hong Kong was always supposed to have national security laws. Article 23 covers this, and it's in Hong Kong's basic law. You do get a lot of protest supporters wanting to overlook this, which is somewhat ironic because they're usually the ones who are saying the joint declaration and basic law should be respected when it suits them. But there are way more ironic things about this movement in Hong Kong than just this, so I'm not going to harp on this point too much. So moving on to the second point, it's also important to note that every major country has their own national security laws. So there is a sense of irony also when you consider that the US has been very vocal in opposing Hong Kong's national security laws. And this point was made even more ironic when they took a short break from criticizing China about this to build what was essentially a version 2.0 of the Chinese Exclusion Act, now banning Chinese students from being able to study certain topics in America, which is appalling on its own. But in regards to the double irony part, they used their own national security laws to accomplish this. America, of course, has used national security as an excuse to create some pretty terrible policies that took rights away from even Americans, such as the so-called Patriot Act. And this should be a good reason for anyone to be concerned about national security laws anywhere in the world, and in terms of looking at what could it potentially eventually be used for. And this is why, of course, with other reasons, people don't really go around in life hoping for good national security laws. But here we are. We've reportedly got millions of people in Hong Kong who supposedly signed a petition to support the national security laws. I think we were at 2.9 million at last count. And whether that number is true or not, I haven't looked into its legitimacy, but I do know firsthand of many Hong Kongers who are celebrating this move, some of whom have literally prepared a bottle of champagne for this occasion. So what the heck is going on? The short answer is, people are fed up. Hong Kong was ranked the second freest place on earth by measurable freedoms before Occupy Central. It dropped down a bit after that, but it was still holding third place, which is pretty remarkable. And this is according to mathematical, actual, measurable, and tangible freedoms. The report was done by the Cato Institute, which is far from a pro-China institution. They even spent a couple of pages of their report specifically bashing China. But when it came down to the math, according to a Western democratic value-based criteria, Hong Kong ranked very high. So, staying on the topic of ironies, I should mention that America ranks 17th. And they're the ones who are trying the hardest to export their so-called freedoms to Hong Kong the most. For context purposes, I think it's also important to note that Hong Kong is far more free and has been far more free post-handover than they ever were for most of the entire time under British colonial rule. And the biggest impacts to Hong Kong's freedoms post-handover came from the very people who said they wanted to protect Hong Kong's freedoms. They continually told everyone that their freedoms were at risk of being eroded by the CCP, but it's them beating up civilians who disagree with them or try to even just clear their roadblocks in the streets. It was them burning down offices of elected pro-establishment officials while pretending to support political freedoms. It was them destroying public transit systems, traffic lights, crosswalk speakers for the hearing impaired, and elevator entrances to the MTR used by disabled residents. It was them who have killed an old street cleaner by throwing a brick at his head. And it is them who lit a construction worker on fire, permanently disfiguring him, and so much more. People are fed up, and it's created a pretty special circumstance where you have residents begging and cheering for national security laws. Now, of course, the violence itself can be prosecuted under normal laws. And this is important, but it's a bit superficial in the bigger picture. Hong Kong needs to get rid of the rot underneath that has allowed countries like America to interfere and interject themselves into Hong Kong's politics and protests with very little consequences to the people on the ground collaborating with them. This goes beyond just passive funding, which is, of course, happening. Dr. Michael Pillsbury, a former Reagan administration official and current director for Chinese strategy at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C., openly admitted that the NED, a CIA-backed NGO, is pouring millions of dollars into Hong Kong. The Chinese University of Hong Kong also openly shows on its 2014 annual return that they took money from the NDI, another American-backed NGO, for their comparative and public law department, which is connected to Benny Tai, one of the main leaders of the Occupy Central protests. This clearly exposed funding is, of course, probably only scratching the surface, But move on to the other things that you can actually see with your eyes as well. Joshua Wong and a few of his mates flew to Washington, D.C., multiple times actually, but the most outrageous time of all was when him and a few of his buddies testified in front of Congress at what was called the Summer of Discontent. This was basically an anti-China carnival where they shared ideas about how to contain China and tried to push through legislation to sanction Hong Kong, which in itself is absolutely ridiculous. You've got countries where people are dying because of American sanctions, and here you are, you have these protest leaders begging for them. Not only is it stupid, it's counterproductive. Guess who Hong Kongers are going to have to need to rely on more when they're cut off from the rest of the world and lose their special trading statuses? Joshua's active effort to destroy the city and act as a cheerleader for American aggression against China is a national security issue. Just try to imagine if during California independence protests or Hawaiian independence protests, which were going on for a part of the same time that the Hong Kong protests were going on, imagine if a bunch of them flew over to Beijing to testify in front of the Chinese Communist Party at the National People's Congress and brainstorm on how to contain America and push China's agenda along while helping to secure Hawaiian independence. Imagine if they actually started to make headway and China began passing legislation to penalize America and place sanctions on them from other countries. Take it one step further, and what if Chinese Communist Party officials flew to Hawaii to walk alongside the protesters, talk with them, and cheer them on while they destroyed their cities? Because that's exactly what happened in reverse. Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Josh Hawley, and many others came to hang out with the protesters in Hong Kong, and they had such beautiful words for them too, which is in stark contrast to what they have to say about their own protesters, who they don't seem too overly eager to meet in the streets like they did with the Hong Kong protesters, despite not needing to fly halfway across the world now. But back to my main point, how would this ever be tolerated in America? It wouldn't, of course, and they've got national security laws to take care of this kind of treasonous behavior. This is, of course, exactly why America doesn't want to see Hong Kong enact national security laws, because their free pass to send their people over and openly interfere with local Hong Kong issues would come to an end. Perhaps even more outrageous than senators on the street in Hong Kong, when you look at Miles Guo, the exiled corrupt businessman from mainland China living in New York City, he has made actual live streams where he's standing beside Steve Bannon and directing the protesters live, sending them commands and instructions about where they should move next. Miles also live-streamed a call with Baguio Liang, a Hong Kong independent spokesperson and leader of Hong Kong's National Front political group. In that live stream, Miles told him that he would be given all the support he needs, financial included, from him and the American government. A couple of weeks after that live stream, Baguio Liang was arrested in connection with what was one of the largest explosive hauls in Hong Kong's history. When you look at all this monkey business going on, I find it really hard to believe that anyone wouldn't be able to see a good reason why not only national security laws are needed in Hong Kong, but why so many people are ready to support them. The best argument against implementing national security laws in Hong Kong is, of course, what will the government eventually do with it? This requires continuing to allow this flawed logic of constantly talking about what might happen while ignoring what is happening right now. Just like with worrying about one day losing freedoms, while there are people in the streets actually taking freedoms away from you now. Now, people have slowly become less concerned about what might happen with national security laws when they consider the terrorism that's happening today, in part because there aren't national security laws. And in that regard, maybe it's time more people start thinking this way. When 23 years after handover, saying year after year that we might lose our freedoms, yet nearly a quarter of a century later, here we are, with Hong Kong still ranking as one of the freest places on earth. And the most substantial loss of freedom has come from those pretending to fight for Hong Kong's freedoms, but in fact have only succeeded in pleasing the geopolitical interests of foreign governments constantly looking for ways to destabilize China, even if it comes at the expense of destroying the lives of Hong Kongers. It's time to put Hong Kong first, and that entails cleaning up this rot. This is why Hong Kong's national security laws are being pushed through and why it has so much support. That's it from me, guys, and I'll catch you in the next video.